I'd like to welcome Melissa Forziat to another presentation of her wonderful marketing expertise, and I will go ahead and turn it over to her for another ASB TDC and Melissa Forziat event presentation. Thank you so much for joining us again, Melissa.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be talking again with businesses from the ASB TDC. And, for those who think that my name sounds familiar, we've done several series together now over the last few years, bringing in all kinds of marketing information. And it's always fun to see an active chat with this group. So thank you to Julie and Mary Beth and everybody who put this event together. A quick background on me for those who haven't seen me present before. It might help give some context to what I'll present here. So I actually started out in my career doing major international sport events. I worked Olympic Winter Games and Rugby World Cup. I worked with the US Olympic Committee. So these are some of the biggest brands in the world. And one of the things that's really interesting when you work up close with an organization like that, of that size and of that scale, is that when you see marketing roll out, you also see that at a big scale. And, with something like an Olympic Games, they're constantly doing rollouts and announcements and launches, and you get to see every little thing blown up huge. And so I brought that information with me when I started my own practice. About 10 years ago, I started my own business. I'm a micro business owner. I'm sure many of you are micro business owners as well. And so realistically, we have to figure out how to do smart marketing with more limited resources than an Olympic Games would have. Generally speaking, that's our situations. So, for me, a presentation like this is about saying, how can you take examples that you're seeing on a bigger scale and then extract information from it that can be useful to you for your business? So this presentation is a little bit different than some of the other presentations I've done, which might be more theoretically based. This one's going to be very example based. We're going to talk through ideas about getting your marketing message out there and all the different packages that can come in. But then we're actually going to show a lot of examples of companies that you've probably heard of doing things like this so that you can start to see in the real world, what does this look like? My hope is that one of the outcomes of this presentation is that it starts cluing you in more and more to look at the examples that other people are setting when they're marketing to you, and to start seeing which types of things feel like good information for you to apply back in some way to your business. That's really part of what we do as marketers, is we're always gathering input from the outside and seeing what might actually work with our own brand as well. So hopefully that just sort of clues you in to start looking for some of those things in the real world by starting here today and looking at examples. So having said all that, a few quick housekeeping items. First of all, I know that we're all on mute here, but I encourage you to also minimize distractions on your end. Even though it's not interfering with everybody else, I don't want it to interfere with you either. So if there's something happening on your side that perhaps is catching your attention, like maybe the ringer is on your phone or you have a messaging device on, this is a good time to shut that down so that you can really focus in on this material. Because the more you're thinking about your business as we talk through some of these examples, the more likely you are to get ideas in real time. Another thing that I wanted to point out here is that we do have there are a lot of slides in this deck, but also some of them may feel like really good resource documents for you to look at later. So I have actually sent a link to the whole slide deck to Julie to send out to all of you after this. And Julie is also grabbing a recording of this. So just know that if you're rushing to take notes, you'll be able to go back and check out all of this information again if you want to dig into something a little bit more. And then in terms of questions, I generally carve out time for questions at the end. We're going to cover a lot of ideas briefly. And so it may give you some things that you want to start looking at later, and you can make notes of that as you go along. And then let's ask those questions at the end. You can type them into the chat. So this is a good time actually to make sure we all know where the chat is. Make sure it's set to everyone so that we can all see your questions or your comments, and then go ahead and introduce yourselves. You already have heard who I am, but I'd love to know who's here with us live. So feel free to put your name, your business name, and what you do into the chat so everybody can see it. And if you see anybody who does something that feels like there's a collaborative opportunity for you, I encourage people to connect with each other in the chat, because it's a great place to meet other businesses that are really actively working through things for their marketing. So looking forward to hearing who's here with us today. But having said all that, let me tell you a bit about what we have coming up in this session so you know what to expect. First, we're going to just generally talk about 6 smart principles of marketing messaging that we're going to be addressing as we get into the more specific information after that. Then we're going to look at a few different elements. We're going to start by looking at showcasing what your brand represents and some tools that you have for doing that. We'll look at how do you capture and hold your audience's attention. We'll talk a little bit about how do you know how to put your message where your target market is. And then lastly, we'll finish off with talking about repetition and patterns and some of that long-term marketing strategy and the long-term memory strategy that we can have here. And so great to hear about some of your businesses here in the chat. Welcome to everybody who's joining in with us live. And if you're not on with us live, I hope you're enjoying the recording. So are you in the right place? Let's just make sure so that you know this is the right place to spend the next hour of your lives. So this material is designed for you. If you want to know what message you need to send to attract an audience in, to grab people who haven't heard your message before and to get them to start paying attention to you. But also this material is for you if you're trying to learn how to hold the audience's attention, because we need to keep them focused on us so they actually remember that they saw our message to begin with. So those are a couple different things that we'll be looking at. They're really 2 different approaches, and they require some different tools, and we'll talk through all of that today. So if you like what you're hearing, let's get into it. Let's talk about how to all those smart principles of marketing messaging that we want to make sure that we're grabbing and holding people's attention. Okay, first things first, 6 smart principles of marketing messaging. This is probably the most general aspect of this presentation, because at the end of the day, before we can talk techniques, we have to know what we're trying to accomplish to begin with. So let's talk through 6 different things that we want to accomplish. The first one is when you are marketing, you really want to keep the focus on your customer. And as much as I might make that sound obvious by just having, this one slide with these few words on it, this is not how a lot of people approach their marketing, especially micro businesses. A lot of times if I do a presentation, people will come up to me afterwards and they'll show me business cards or websites and they'll say, what do you think of this? And I'll pick an element and I'll say, oh, well, why did you choose the color green? And they'll say, because I liked it. But that's really not a measure of success with your marketing. It really needs to resonate with your audience first. And you need to know what message you're sending to your audience first. And of the things that send the right message, then it's about what you like the best and what you think will work the best. So, keeping your focus on your customer is important, because we have to sift through a lot of other forces that are trying to get their attention in order to get them to focus on our message. So we need to know that we're doing the most we can to grab their attention and keep it if we're going to be successful. Now, another thing that you can try to accomplish here with your marketing is showcasing what your brand represents. You want to capture your audience's attention, and in the process of that, you want to make sure they understand exactly who your business is. What are the different things that it represents? What is it like to do business with your business? You want all of this to read to them so that you're weeding in the people who are interested in what the reality is going to be when they're actually working with you. Now, I've mentioned this a couple of times here, but then, a third goal is that you have to actually capture your audience's attention. The message is all well and good, but it only works if they actually pay attention to it. And so we need to have some ways to cut through the noise and get them to focus on what we're saying to them. And then we need to hold it, because if somebody only spends a couple of seconds paying attention to us, are they going to remember that they even saw the message later? How much of that are they really going to process? The longer somebody spends with your message, the more likely they are to do something about it, refer you, or just remember it later when they do need you. Now, a 5th element that's important, and one that we'll have a little section dedicated to here today, is, putting your message where your target market is. We want to make sure that when we've got the right message, marketing is all about, do you know what you're saying? Are you in a place where your target market is? And now are you saying it? So part of this is making sure you know the where question, and understanding that when you're connecting with your audience, you're actually in front of your audience, not just a volume of people, but the specific people that you're trying to attract. And then lastly, being consistent. This is something we'll look at a bit at the end as well. A lot of times business owners shy away from the idea of consistency because they feel like, aren't people bored with my message already? I need to mix it up so it's fresh and interesting to them. And you want to do the exact opposite of that, because it's by creating patterns in their brain that they're actually going to remember what you're saying to them. And when we keep switching it up, we confuse the audience because they don't know who we are anymore. So consistency is actually something we aspire to really in marketing, yet so many of the clients that I talk to feel like they need to shy away from it. So if that is your inclination, just know we're really trying to lean into the opposite of that. We're trying to make it so that people can't help but start to notice patterns in what we're saying to them. That's what sticks in the brain and helps their brains do the marketing work for us. So hopefully all those 6 different things that I just shared with you, all those 6 different principles, you're going to start to see threads of that throughout the rest of this presentation as we pull in different techniques you can use to achieve these goals. So let's jump in and talk about the showcasing your brand piece first, because again, remember, we are trying to keep the focus on the audience, but we do need to get the correct message across about what we offer and what it's like to do business with us. And with that in mind, we have a number of different techniques that we can use that I'll be sharing with you today. You can start thinking about what your brand actually is and what it needs to convey to people before you start creating all these other tools that we want to look at. So the first element that I wanted to share with you is this idea of values, your company or your business values. Now, some people think about values as a few words they put on the about page of their website, and then they're going to walk away from them. But that's not really how it works, because values are about, how you do business, how you're going to show up day in and day out with your audience. So these are the guiding principles of how your business operates. So you want to think very carefully, not just about what you wish your values were, but what they're actually going to be. And this is, it's one thing if it's just you and your business to start to think through what your values are. It's a totally different question if you've got multiple people operating in your business, multiple people who are customer facing. So if you're in that situation, you're going to want to get on the same page as people, because yes, everybody has their own personality. Everybody is a different person who represents your business, but they need to seem like they're all representing the same thing. And so if you can agree on some core values, you can start to get comfortable that your customers and your clients are going to at least have those things in common in their experience with your business, no matter who they're communicating with. So you can see some examples of value words in this graphic. There's so many to choose from. It's about saying, here's what we stand for, and here's the experience you're going to have. And this is something that can set your business apart from perhaps competitors in your industry, because at the end of the day, you're weeding in the customers who are looking for more of that experience that you're offering, and potentially weeding out the ones who wouldn't be right for whatever way of doing business you are going to offer. So those are some things to think about here. Now, if we look at an example of a company that puts values at the forefront, I've often thought about Apple, especially Apple's old marketing, as really leaning into values, specifically innovation. Innovation is something that came across in their tagline, Think Different. It comes across in the way they do business, the packaging and the design. And I often found, especially years ago with the friends that I had that were sort of Apple product fanatics, that they would tout things like this as the reason why they bought those products, they liked those products, or even why they were willing to spend more money on those products, because it was all just being done a little differently. It was the customer service was different. Everything was presented as innovative to them. And that was part of what they were buying into when they bought the technology behind it. And so, that's a company that I often associate with values, but you can look around and start seeing, are there other companies out there marketing to you that are leading with a value system and showing you how they're going to do business in the way that they're marketing? So one thing that I want to ask you, just to see how much time we need to really spend looking at some of these details. A question I want to pose to you, and feel free to answer this in the chat if you're on with me live. Have you defined your company values? Is this something that you've actually thought through as an exercise, whether it's just you representing your company, or is this something that you've actually talked with your team about, or at least shared values with your team to make sure that you're all on the same page? So feel free to weigh in on the chat if you've had work done around this area, or if this is something that's brand new to you. AY is saying, not really, haven't done this work yet. So this is an element that is a great starting point. Alicia, I haven't thought about this yet. For those of you who are jumping in and saying you haven't thought about this yet, this is going to be a really good starting point to make sure that, yes, although we are trying to keep the focus on the audience, we need to be realistic about what's going to actually happen when we deliver the product or service to them. On the other hand, Tabitha is saying, yes, we have been working through clearly communicating them out from leadership. I love that. So Tabitha, there's probably going to be other information later in this presentation that'll be the next step for you. And this is a really good place to start from. It sounds like you have a whole team of people that you're trying to connect with about this and make sure everybody's on the same page. Let me share with you another element that is a close cousin of values, but is not the same thing exactly. Let's look at tone. So your tone, you can say that tone is the sound of your voice, but this can also come across in writing. It's your style of communicating to your audience. So tone is actually an incredibly powerful tool that we have, because I want you to think, for example, if there's anybody that you know or that you follow where you always want to go back to them for certain types of information. It could be a friend or family member that you love to go to for advice. It could be somebody that you follow. It could be a talk show host or a novelist or a newspaper columnist. It could be a podcaster that you love to listen to. If an author of any sort. Is there somebody that shares thoughts on topics that you always want to go back to them for their opinion? You may also be listening to other people's opinions in the same category, but you're always going to go back to this person because you just like how they deliver what they say. If you can think of anybody like that for you, I want you to think about how powerful tone is in creating loyalty, because there's probably a lot of people who could talk about the things that they're talking about, but how they do it is what grabs you, is what attracts you to them. And so creating a tone is something that allows you to establish a loyalty among your audience, among the people that you want to reach. So you can see on this graphic, there's some example words here of tone. There's really quite a wide spread of tone words. And even some of these words have many different levels and layers to them. Like I think of humor. Humor is one word, but it can mean a lot of different things. Humor can come across in so many ways. And so what gets really interesting is if you start to play with numerous different tone words, if you get 2 or 3 and they don't all seem alike, okay, how can you be both neighborly and sarcastic? Okay, well, what would that look like if you were trying to use that as your tone that you're communicating with? Sometimes you're in an industry where a certain tone might feel more standard. Like, if you were a lawyer, maybe a standard tone might be more serious or factual. But if you were like the comedic lawyer, that would be going out on a limb, but the people who are looking for that might potentially gravitate towards you because who else do they have in that category? So when you pick a tone, you're sort of inviting people to weed in who are really interested to hear people communicate in that way. And if you get very specific, you might potentially weed some people out, but they might not be the right people for your business if you plan on delivering that tone even in your customer interactions. So I like Tanya's pointing out here, construction tone is professional cuss words. I mean, think about that. There is sort of an invitation to join in or an exclusion to stay out based on the very specific nature of the tone. So I actually really like that example because it just gives you real world proof that people lean into things like this. So a couple examples I wanted to show you here. We've got this, I don't know if any of you have ever seen this old commercial from Extra Gum. They went way emotional with this commercial. It's like a great love story told. So you can see some screenshots here of some different moments of this love story that they tell. And then they have these little pictures of these moments being drawn on their gum wrappers. And they have like this beautiful emotional song in the background. And I can't help falling in love with you. Like it's very tear jerking, but it's gum, so it's this interesting choice. And it's the kind of thing that you're watching a commercial and you find yourself like kind of tearing up a little bit and you're thinking, what's happening to me? And then you remember Extra because they went for that little bit more. They went for something a little bit more specific. If you didn't like it, maybe you would choose another gum, right? So when we're picking tones, we're really hoping that the people that we're trying to reach are going to be really hooked, and that the people that we're weeding out doesn't really make a dent in the customer numbers that we were looking for or the revenue numbers that we were looking for. So this is an example of a company that led with tone in a commercial. Here's a very different example, maybe a little bit more along the lines of what Tani was just sharing. This is some old packaging for Cards Against Humanity. And they really were trying to set the stage for what the playing of their game experience would be like for the people who play it, right? If you look at the packaging, it's a party game for horrible people. Unlike most of the party games you've played before, Cards Against Humanity is as despicable and awkward as you and your friends. Their FAQs on their website at the point when I pulled this example was your dumb questions. So here's the thing. If you don't like their marketing, you're not going to like their game. If you do like their marketing, you might like their game. So they're trying to weed the right people in from the very beginning. And hopefully that prevents complaints. They are very specific in their tone. And so they're trying to make sure that they reduce the number of returns, that they reduce the number of complaints, that they get only the people who are really excited about their game to buy it, so that they're getting the positive word of mouth. So you can think about examples like that. And if we take that a little bit further and we think about tone as it relates to representatives, let's look at spokespeople. We look at a company like Waze that provides directions when you're driving, when you're navigating. And then they partner up with somebody like Morgan Freeman. Why would they do something like that? Well, Morgan Freeman has his own reputation that he's built. He's known for like gravitas, and he's known for his soothing voice when he's acting. And so Waze thought this would be a really interesting pairing for us, because when people want to be soothed, when they're being navigated to a place they're unfamiliar with. So, they paired up with somebody who already had their own story, their own image, and they decided what they wanted to attach to and what that would mean for their audience. Let's look at a different example here, though. We've got let's call this a spokes gecko, shall we? The Geico gecko. Now, this is a really interesting variation of the spokesperson model, because this is an invented spokesperson. The Geico gecko is an animation. It's a cartoon. It's something that they've created, not something that already existed in the world. So it probably took a lot more effort for this company to build a profile around their spokesperson or spokes gecko. This would take a huge amount of work, a lot of resources, a lot of money. But then at a certain point, we get to this tipping point where we as an audience have now had enough information, enough experiences with this fictional spokesperson that we've now got all the backstory, we've got all the history, and we look for whatever the next adventure of this mascot is going to be. As we look for new information, as we look for new commercials, they're going to keep adding to the story. So it's an interesting flip of the model, because it probably took a lot more effort for them to build that backstory for us. But then once they have it, they have way more control, because this gecko is never going to do something that's not approved by the company it represents. Whereas a real life person could, because they're living their own lives. They're not necessarily and nobody's timeless. Everybody is going to age as time goes on, but this gecko never will. So, they've got a different model here, but it still comes with the same ideas of what values, what tone are they able to layer onto this mascot, and how can they use that to communicate to us what their company is about. One more that I wanted to show you here, and this is a really fun example. If you've ever seen the movie Joy, feel free to let me know in the comments here in the chat. If you haven't seen it, this is a good film for people who are entrepreneurs to watch. It's certainly inspiring, and it basically tells this, not to give everything away, but it's telling the story of a real life person. Joy Mangano is really known for success with home shopping and different inventions. And so this movie is chronicling the first one that made it big for her, which was a mop. And, she was trying to sell on, I believe it was QVC. And at that time, QVC was selling with these major, these famous salespeople and these celebrity salespeople. But Joy was trying to sell a mop. And when somebody famous was trying to sell that, it didn't really ring true to the audience. But when she took a leap and actually tried to do some sales through QVC, she was able to speak about the product in a way that showed that she connected with the other people who used it. She talked about the types of spills that she cleaned up and, the experiences she was having with her kids. And she came off as relatable. And so relatability was something that she then had layered onto her as a spokesperson for her own company. It was a big, bold move for that network at that time. And she, was representing a different model, and one that it's just another tone, another style. So these are all some things that you can look at as things that could inspire you. One thing that you can also potentially do when you're looking at the values, when you're looking at the tone, when you're looking at the things that set your brand apart, is by showing what's different. Because chances are, whatever business you have other businesses in your industry that compete against you in some way. And so how can you start making choices that show how you do business and maybe how it's different from how others do business? And I like this example, this tagline from Avis, where they show points of difference to their competitors, but they're subtle about how they say it. They don't get themselves into trouble. Avis, we try harder. There is a suggestion that they're saying we try harder than our competitors, but they haven't overtly said that. They keep it really simple in their tagline, but it's showing a value that they represent here. We're going to work really hard to make you happy as a customer. So this is, something that you can look at and saying, here's what we stand for, but also maybe look for what you stand for is nuanced or different from some of your competitors. You can highlight that with them. Now, all of this is well and good, but only to the extent that you can actually get this message across to your audience, because they're the ones who have to receive it if you're going to make any money in your business. So let's talk a little bit about capturing and holding your audience's attention. Now, I want to start with a question to all of you who are on with me live here. How much time do you think you actually have to get your audience's attention? Go ahead into the chat and let me know what your instinct on this is. Maybe think about when you're looking at marketing, maybe when you're scrolling through social media or you're looking at billboards, any place where you're actually paying attention to where people are marketing to you. We've had everything from 7 seconds to less than 10 seconds. Okay, so far our answers are all between 3 and 10 seconds. Thanks everybody for jumping in with numbers on that. We have a range there, but we still have everywhere from 3 to 10 seconds in people's initial thoughts on the answer to this question. So I do want you to think about, like, okay, 3 to 10 seconds. It does depend on where you're listening, where you're paying attention to the marketing, right? So for example, if you're watching a commercial on TV and you're sitting through it, how much time are you really spending listening to that or watching that? Versus, let's say you're scrolling through social media. As you're scrolling, how much time do you actually spend looking at the images or the headlines before you keep scrolling? For some of us, it's 2 seconds or less. But then something like, a commercial you might spend more time with. Something like, I don't know, let's say you're driving and you look at a billboard. How long do you look at the billboard before you look away? Probably that under 10 seconds is accurate for all of this. So when you're thinking about that, that is a huge amount of work that our businesses need to do, because whatever marketing materials you create take you hours, days to create. And somebody might look at it for a few seconds and not even remember that they saw it later. So how can we make the absolute most of the time that we have their attention? How can we get their attention? Let's start with a couple tools that cut through at that level. So color is a big one. Colors matter. Now, there are some people who are colorblind, and so this factor is not an element for them. But for those who do, colors mean something. And we need to lean in to what those colors mean, because you're not going to re-educate an entire population on the meaning of colors for your brand. Your best bet is to really think about what the colors already mean and lean into it. So I do want to put a little caveat here. This graphic, and you can use this to start thinking about, what you're saying to your audience with the colors of your brand that you've chosen, or if you're still choosing them, this is a great reference for you. This is a compilation of a number of different searches I've done on meaning of color. This is a very US specific color chart. So if you have a business where you're marketing in other countries, you're going to want to look up international, or at least color meanings in other countries where you're selling, to make sure that you're culturally appropriate. This, though, if you're selling in the US or maybe even across North America, you're going to want to look at a reference like this to start making sure you're in alignment, so that you can start leaning in and getting people's attention based on what they already understand. So that's one tool that we have. Now, a company that you really leverages this is a company like Nickelodeon. You look at their choice of the color orange, and that is really about being playful, being fun. And that is mimicked in everything that you see in their graphics and their design. They choose big bubbly letters. These are different iterations of Nickelodeon logos over time. And you can see a number of choices here that feel like they all lean into the fun element. We've got the Nickelodeon on the splat. We've got the nickname. So all of this is still, even though there are iterations of it, it's still playing within the same sphere, that playful space. Now, another tool we have is imagery. And I love this image because it just goes to show you how much you can say with a picture. And this is so smart to me because, if we look at this as a Starbucks ad, and they wanted to hook in a Star Wars audience without actually infringing on any licensing, I guess this is how you would do it, right? You take your own product, you take your cups, you have your logo on it, but now you're going to, light up the straws like lightsabers. You're going to put it in front of a backdrop of space. You're going to make it look like they're dueling, and boom, you've just tapped into a whole other audience. This is something that is an incredibly creative way of not breaking laws to hook in another audience. And at the end of the day, they now get double the exposure, at least double, right? They're hooking in both the audience of people who like Starbucks, and they're making people who are into Star Wars pay extra attention, because there's an assumption here that there's going to be a special or a deal, or that they're in some way catering to this other audience that they wouldn't normally cater to. Now, if we look at another example, here's an image of the old Beatles Revolver album. Look at how detailed that is. So here's why this is so interesting to me. If you were in a record store at the time or whatever, if you were looking at a record, if you're working, whatever the music delivery system was that you were holding at the time, if you're holding this, for me, it was records. When people had cover art like this, you spend time holding the record in your hands. You spend time looking at it, looking at all the different images here. And the longer you spend holding it, the longer you spend touching it, the longer you have this experience with this product, the more likely you are to buy it, the more likely you are to come back later and buy it or remember it, maybe give it as a gift. So it's just another element that they played with. And it works because there's another element of artistry for an artistic business. Now, another tool that we have is font. Font implies that there's writing. So the writing is using words that say something, but also the font itself is sending a message. So there are 5 different categories that are outlined here. We've got the serif fonts. They have those little hooks on the end. So it tends to be something that's used more in print. In novels and books, you're going to see this as a more traditional, slightly more formal version of font versus the sans serif, which is more used in web content because it doesn't have those little hooks on the end. So it's a lot cleaner. And in a lot of cases, it'll be more legible when read online. That third category there is script fonts, which tend to be considered the very fancy fonts, perhaps more feminine. Display and decorative is a wide range. So I've chosen one here that was especially bold. It kind of reminds me of Halloween. When you look at something like this, you start to see that, okay, you use this for headlines. If you're using, entire pages of copy and something like this, it's going to get overbearing, but it sends a very clear message when used sparingly. And then this last category would be your modern fonts. A lot of times we're going to see graphic designers choosing fonts in this category. It's a little bit more progressive, a little cooler. So we've got these different styles that you can play with. And I just wanted to give you a quick snapshot of even those elements we've already discussed, why it matters so much. All right, we've got 3 graphics here that all say Friday the 13th. But look how different they are, and look how different the meaning is for each of them. We've got that top one, Friday the 13th feels like a horror movie. We've got the black and the white and the bloody red. We've got the 13 that's dripping. We've got these sort of nails on a chalkboard font writing. Whereas that bottom left kind of reminds me more of like a Jane Austen novel. Got that flowery, more formal serif font. And then we compare that up against the one on the bottom right, which to me looks like a kid's party. Why? Well, it's got balloons and it's got the bright colors and it's a little bit more bubbly. All of these things say Friday the 13th, but they all mean something very different when they say it. And I ask you, which one attracted your eye the first? Which one does your eye keep gravitating to? Maybe that says something about you and what you're looking for. And so you can start to see how much these things really matter in delivering a message. Let's take this a step further. Let's look at shape. Shapes mean something. So a square or a box, that can mean order or logic or security. The triangle often means energy or power. It can be a more masculine symbol. And then circles tend to be used as a meaning of connection or community. You'll see a lot of nonprofits using circles for that reason. Sometimes it has a more feminine connotation as well when used in logos. So let's look at a couple logos just to see what happens when we start combining elements like this. So I've chosen a couple logos here that have extra messaging within them or subliminal messaging within them. So this seems like the simplest possible logo. It just looks like the words FedEx smashed together with 2 different colors. But even with something like this, you look at it and there's a subliminal message there. Between the E and the X, in that negative space, that white space between them, there's a forward pointing arrow. What does that say to us as consumers? Is it telling us to go forward with FedEx? Is it telling us that they're going to send our packages forward? There's some sort of message that's happening there. And again, this looks so simple. You wouldn't even realize that you're missing an element like this. But then when you notice it, you can't stop noticing it. And it's always registering on some level. But here's one that I absolutely love this one. This is probably my favorite logo. So Tostitos. Looks like it just says Tostitos, but when you look a little more closely, that TIT in the middle is actually two people holding up a chip and getting ready to dunk it into salsa. They have, not only do they have sort of a color scheme here and a font scheme, but they have now actually marketed two products within their logo, and they've made it a social product just by looking at these two people together celebrating over a chip. So this is something where a lot of people miss this when they're looking at the logo in terms of really registering to themselves that they saw this. But it's getting in there on some level if you never noticed it before. And once you see this, you can't unsee it because it's always there for you. So, you may know some examples of other companies that have done logos that have subliminal messages in them, but this is all shape. It's all, tools that we've already discussed being used in real life. So when it comes to really finding ways to hold your audience's attention, now, once you've used these different techniques to capture it, now you have to say something to people. This is where you need to have good content, or you need to sort of circle them around all of the content that you've shared. This is where you start using keywords and consistent keywords to keep reinforcing that the message is still for them. This is where you decide what's the next call to action I want to make. What's the next part of my funnel that I want to drive you to? And you start keeping people with you for as long as you possibly can. We have to think about this stuff beforehand because it does not happen by accident. It happens by intention. Now, having said all that, you can plan all of this out, but you also need to know, how do you get it in front of your audience? So I just wanted to cover this slightly because this isn't a conversation about, we've done the where's your target market conversation in longer form, but this is something that I want to make sure we mention at least briefly here. So I want to pose a question to those who are on live with me. Do you know who your target markets are? Is this work that you've done? We've covered material like this before, so some of you might have been at previous webinars where we've talked about this. But I just want to get a quick sense for those who are on live of, is this something that you've worked through for your business? Anna's jumping in and saying, yes, you've done some work on this. Tashmanite is saying a little bit. Katie's saying mostly. So we've had some people do a bit of work here, which is part of the reason why I'm going to keep this a little bit briefer. Tawny and Tarane White, let's see, it seems like most people, Alicia, it seems like most people have done a bit of work in this area. So let's just keep this brief in the conversation around brand and marketing messaging. So let's look at a couple of examples here. Here we've got something like Domino's. They're trying to reach a very wide audience. They're trying to be accessible. So they're going to do something like, marketing in places where everyday people are going to see it. That's going to be based on not only the location of where their locations actually are for their brick and mortar, for their physical spaces. It's going to be, where do they put their commercials? Where are they advertising to you? You're going to see Domino's popping up in a lot of places. You're going to see them near college campuses. You're going to see them in places where, they're looking at a market that's going to be right for what this product is and the price point that it's at. And that may sound like a really obvious thing to do. Don't you want all brands to just reach a wide audience? Not necessarily. Here's a very different example. And to me, these are polar opposites. We've got Rolls-Royce. They are going to be marketing in an exclusive way. Their product is much more elite. It's much more based on luxury. And so they need to reflect that in how they're doing their outreach. And, I really enjoy looking for examples of Rolls-Royce marketing because they're not marketing to me. So if I actually go out and look for how they're marketing to people, I'm always wowed. There was a time I did a really deep dive into their website and found that their bio, their About Us page is basically like a feature film narrated by Kate Winslet. Couldn't believe it. And this isn't something they're just putting out there. This is something that if you're the right person, you'll find it. Or if you're me and you're like hunting for it, you'll find it. But, They're going to be marketing in different ways. They're going to be doing hopefully more word of mouth in certain circles. They're going to be sponsoring elite events. They're really going to be looking at where they put their message. They're not doing this the same as Domino's. So really think about what that looks like. Now, one other thing that tends to come up a lot with clients that I work with is this idea of, but I have a bunch of different target markets that I'm trying to reach. And that's not a problem. That's just something you need to cater to in your marketing. Remember, if you are in this situation, most businesses are. You're not alone with this. So an example I like to think about here, you could plug in any automobile company into this model if you wanted to. I've put Toyota here. You can pick any other one if you want, because the idea is we've got something like Toyota, which is the overarching brand. It's, this is the make. They stand for whatever they stand for in our minds as this umbrella logo, this umbrella brand. But within that, they have all these different models, and their models are designed for different types of people. So they're not going to try to sell the Sienna where they're trying to sell the Tundra. They're not going to try to sell the Tundra where they're trying to sell the Prius. All of those things are different audiences. So they're going to be looking at all the different places they're marketing, and they're going to ask, which vehicle is right for us to sell here? Is it the Sienna? Is it the Tundra? Is it the Prius? Is it whatever other models they have? They're going to look at the full list of it, and they're going to make really careful decisions about this magazine or this TV program, or, wherever they're marketing. What is the exact right model to present to this audience based on all the research they've done? They have all these other vehicles that they can sell, and we know that, but they're only trying to tell us about the ones that feel most relevant in each specific place. So they can do all of that marketing simultaneously. They just need to be saying the right thing to each audience. And that's how we can approach it for our businesses as well. This is an example I use very often with clients, because so many of us struggle over, how do I message to different audiences at once? Let's cover one last topic before we go for questions here. Repetition, patterns, long-term memory, this matters. If somebody's only spent a couple seconds with your message, they're probably not going to remember that they saw it later, but we want them to remember it. So how do you do that? How do you keep people with you? Well, first of all, we use keywords and hooks. These are words that trigger and attract them and keep people reconnecting to your message. So you can use words that might be in a brand statement, like a statement that explains who you serve and how you help those people. You can keep using that language as you're sharing your message, or you can focus in on pain points. You can talk about the problem over and over again. You've seen infomercials do that a lot. So like, are you having trouble sleeping? Oh yeah, this is for me, okay. And then you can keep reiterating the trouble sleeping, and you keep poking at that pain point, and people keep thinking, oh, you're going to tell me something relevant for me here. Adjectives is another one that I like. I think about something like choosy moms choose Jif. It's not just any old moms, like the ones who really care about their kids' nutrition choose Jif. That's a very specific gauntlet that's being thrown down there, that they're saying, if you self-select into this cool group of people, then this product is right for you. And, a company like Snickers is going to play a lot with that, with the word hungry. And they are going to use the word hungry everywhere. When they write it, they're going to make it big. It's going to be in their packaging. It's going to be on their website. It's going to be in their commercials. By the end of seeing those messages or hearing those messages, they're trying to make you feel hungry. So they really leverage that word, hoping to create the pain point that they're trying to solve. Another company that uses words, a specific word very carefully, is Wheaties. They use the word champion a lot, and they use images of champions a lot. They really try to look at the different ways that they can leverage the concept of champions, and then say, but this is for you. Awaken the champion within, breakfast of champions. We can all be champions. See these people? Well, you can do your spreadsheet really well. So it's this idea that they're trying to leverage for all of us. One more I wanted to point out here is, we've got something like Folgers. you've got nothing comes closer to home. The best part of waking up is Folgers in your cup. They've got more than one jingle. And the idea with a jingle is that they want this to get into your head and not leave. A good jingle, they're not trying to mix it up every time. They're not trying to spice it up and give us something new. They want this pattern in our brains, because if you wake up tomorrow singing this jingle to yourself, they just did their job. So the better we can be about like reinforcing the pattern, getting that message out over and over. Not all of us have the resources to market in a way where we can use things like jingles, but you can see that this is just a tool that they're using to reinforce all of these other marketing message techniques that we've been talking about all along. How can you get it to really drive deep into somebody's brain and stay there? Now, I want to make sure we save a lot of time for questions, because we've danced over a lot of ideas today, and some of these may feel more relevant to your business than others. So feel free to start putting any questions into the chat that you want to ask, even if they're specific to your business, because I'm sure that it helps everybody to start talking through examples. You can see here some of the things that we talked about today to help jog your questions. So we talked about 6 SMART principles of marketing messaging, showcasing what your brand represents, capturing and holding your audience's attention. We talked briefly about some ways to look at putting your message where your target market is, and then a little bit about creating that repetition and patterns to get into people's long-term memory. As you get your questions in, a reminder, we do have one more webinar coming up in this series. It's an hour and a half. On July 11th, it's called Create a Profitable Marketing Strategy. We're really going to work through the details of like, how do you build not only a brand awareness level, but get people to stay in front of you as long as possible. And we'll take questions now. And I just wanted to remind you that if you do want to work with the ASB TDC, you can do that. We have the link here on the screen, but I wanted to hand it over to Julie to see if there's anything that she wanted to mention here as well.
Sure. Thanks, Melissa. It's always such a great presentation when you join us. One of the things I'd like to mention is that if you're not already a client of the ASBTDC, then check out our website. In the upper right-hand corner, there is a Get a Consultation button, and someone will get with you very quickly. Also, if you'd like to view not only today's webinar, but we have like I said earlier, a whole lot of resources on finance, marketing, HR, technology. Go to our website to the resources and documents page, and you can access any and all of those. We also have a calendar of our upcoming events, and so check those out. We update those every month, so check those out and see which ones might be applicable to where you are with your business.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And I know we have at least one question here. Okay. And I apologize if I mispronounce your name, but I'm going to say White. What would you suggest for bakery items? For bakeries, you have a really interesting opportunity that not every business has, but you can really play with sensory marketing for your business. So what smells does it evoke? What imagery would evoke the smells? Like, how can you tap into as many senses as possible in the ways that you market? Are there sounds of how you're baking that would make people remember what it smells like for, what the raw dough smells like? And then, are there images that you can show them that make them taste the product? So I would encourage you to think about, like, especially with placement and platforms where you market, what can you use that's going to give people the sensory experience? Sometimes, we're looking at stuff like free samples at farmers markets for that. But even when you're showing things visually, can you elicit that information? What types of techniques were covered in this slide deck do you feel like you could play with to really tap into all those different senses? That would be the big question that I would pose to you there. You might also think about language that people might use to describe home cooked or like home baked goods. What sort of language would they use to describe their favorite baked goods? Can you start playing with that within your marketing as well? You have really a product that potentially taps into a lot of nostalgia. So that would be something I would suggest checking into for that. I'm gonna, look at Tachmanite's question here again. I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing names here. But what would you suggest for a hobby shop selling trading cards? Also, what marketing suggestions you have for small businesses with one person acting as owner and all of the other positions? At the end of the day, for a business like yours, your audience doesn't necessarily know that it's just you, unless you are, really trying to set yourself apart. Like as a speaker, it's very clear that I am like a figurehead for my business. But for something like what you're doing, you can either lean into that or not, and people won't know if there are other people on your team. So in terms of selling trading cards, one thing I would ask you is, what experience are your customers most looking for? Are they looking for are they looking for something that is a social sort of thing for them? Are they looking for something that is there something else about the collection aspect, a sense of pride, a sense of accomplishment? What are the things, like if you think about your best customers or the people who are really in your industry, what are they looking for, and how can you tap into that in the way that you display your marketing? So if there's sort of a prestige of like, get that one that's really rare, I've got that, what does it feel like for them when they have it in their hands? So those are some things that I would look at there. I think there's an emotional piece to this. If there's also a social piece, you might want to look at that as well. And let's see, I'm just checking to see if there's any questions I've missed here. Josh is asking, what advice would you have for marketing to a customer base such as farmers, where some may have less of a presence online to market to? Well, you've got to be really specific about where your people are. I love that you asked that question, because, a lot of marketers are going to say, you've got to be online, you've got to be on social media, you've got to be doing this. And I'm not one of the people who says that. You need to be where your audience is. And so if they're in community networking events, if they're, if there's local Pee-wee leagues where they're all, showing up and supporting their kids, if there's farmers markets that they're going to be at in a certain location, those are the types of things that you need to be really highlighting in your marketing plan. And so I encourage you to make a real list of where they actually are. And maybe there's more than one segment within your audience. Maybe there are some who are online and there are some who aren't. And then you need to start categorizing it that way too, to make sure that you're covering that whole base. Let me see if I can get one other question in here. I know we're kind of right at time, but hey, Alicia says, how would you go about marketing Chronic Critters overall and possibly each character individually? I am not familiar with Chronic Critters, so that's going to be a tough question for me to answer. But I would say, if based on the each character individually piece, when I think about other products that might be like that, what does Chronic Critters stand for to its audience as a whole? But then each character, who would most resonate with that, and how can you tap into that there's one for everybody? Even companies like, for example, Coca-Cola, they've tried putting people's actual names on cans before, because people will spend forever looking at Coca-Cola, handling cans, and looking for their name. So think about what that means if you actually have a product that people can sympathize with. How can you make it so that people tap into the one that feels most resonant to them? So those are some quick ideas. I know we just bounced around to different people's businesses, but I think that's very much the idea of like, can you gather examples that feel right for your business and leverage them in the real world? Thank you all for contributing those. Such great and very different examples to pull from. Julie, I'll pass it back over to you in case you want to say anything.
Great. Thank you, Melissa. Thanks everyone for joining us. And again, check out our website for our upcoming trainings, and we'll look forward to seeing you again. Thanks, Melissa. We'll see you in July.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.